You are listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I am your host, Celine Yeager. Each week, I bring you advice from athletes, scientists, researchers, and other experts to help you feel and perform your best, no matter what your hormones are doing. This show is a production of Live Feisty Media. Hello, strong, feisty women. I hope you all are well. So a couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of attending the Female Athlete Conference in Boston, Massachusetts, and I got to meet a bunch of you, and that was really special. And thank you to everyone who came up and said hi. That was a real treat. And it was just a really great experience overall. The conference was spearheaded by past guest and absolute phenom, Dr. Kate Ackerman, who put together a really tremendous program. Dr. Stacy Sims was there and presenting, as well as other past and upcoming guests like Abby Smith-Ryan and Samantha Moore. And I got to hang out and dance on a boat with other past guests, Dr. Carla DiGirolamo. And aside from just being a really, really good time, it was also really, really inspiring to be surrounded by so many brilliant, accomplished, confident women presenting scientific findings and offering insights in all things women's sport and performance. We'll be creating content around what we saw and learned there, but it left me feeling really hopeful about the future for sure. All right, before I get to this week's guest, who I was super stoked to speak with, I just want to make one clarification regarding a show we did a few weeks back with Tanya Oxendine from the Wounded Warriors Project. In the intro to that show, I included some stats on sexual assault among women warriors in the Wounded Warriors Project. And I got a note from a longtime listener and retired Army Reserve officer who was concerned that listeners might misunderstand and believe that those statistics were from the military as a whole, and that it might leave people with the impression that the military is a bad and dangerous place for women. So I wanted to just make clear that those stats were among women seeking care through the Wounded Warriors Project, and not from the population of all women currently serving or veterans. And I really appreciate the listener who reached out with her concerns. I always want to be correct and accurate, so thank you for that. Okay, so this week, I had a brilliant conversation with Dr. Nicky Keay, author of Hormones, Health, and Human Potential, a guide to understanding your hormones to optimize your health and performance, which, well, that's why we're here. Nicky is an honorary clinical lecturer in medicine at University College London, and she lectures and researches in the areas of endocrinology with many publications in this field. Her endocrine work is mainly in exercisers, dancers, and athletes, and she's got a focus on relative energy deficiency in sport, REDS, and athletes navigating perimenopause and menopause. Again, our people. And man, I just loved this conversation because Nicky has such a holistic view of hormones. All are hormones. Not only estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, but also human growth hormone and vitamin D and other hormones that are instrumental in our health and performance. And though we certainly talk a lot about hormone therapy and the best types for active women in this show, this conversation goes well beyond menopausal hormone therapy and addresses all the ways that you can optimize your hormonal health. And I just really loved it, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Okay, before we get to it, as always, check us out on Instagram and Facebook at Feisty Menopause. Please sign up for my free weekly newsletter and blog at feistymenopause.com. You can learn much more about all of this and take a deep dive with some of our guests and other experts at our Level Up membership, which you can also find at, feistymenopause.com. And thank you, as always, for the continued great reviews and 5-star ratings. It's been awesome, and it really does help the show. All right. Super quick thanks to Bonafide for their support from pretty much the beginning. Today's show is largely about hormones, and we address the fact in the show that not everybody wants to or can use hormones. And Bonafide has the best non-hormonal product suite out there for relief from hot flashes and low sexual response and vaginal dryness and skin and hair needs and pretty much anything you could be looking for. So thank you, Bonafide. We very much appreciate you. Okay, enough of me. Let's have a few words about those awesome sponsors and get on with the show. All right. Well, hello, Nikki. I'm really excited for our conversation today because hormones are a big deal.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. No, they are indeed a big deal and my passion and my interest. So I'm always happy to talk about them.
Tell us a bit before we start. You have an interesting background. I watched a lot of your videos and dug in a bit, and a lot of it is oriented towards dance. So I'm guessing that I saw a picture of your mom. Like you were a dancer in your past. Just talk a bit about your athletic journey as well.
Well, part of the motivation for studying medicine in the very first place was because I was very keen on sport. I was a competitive swimmer, tennis player, but you're right, my passion was always been and still is dancing. I still do 4 ballet classes a week. Anyway,
Nice.
so therefore, from almost a personal point of view, I was fascinated, of course, by how the human body works, but I was just wondering, well, how does it work in terms of our athletic performance? We do exercise, we do training. I go to my ballet class. Of course, we all know you do this because you want to get fitter, right? But exactly how does that happen? What's the mechanism? And that was sort of my starting question. And I went through medical studies, etc. And then I realized that the answer I was looking for lay in hormones. So that's the area I focused on. And now, having gained all that experience, I'm quite old now, so working in medicine for 30 years, all that experience, clinical experience, research experience, means now I kind of have my dream job, because now I can go back and answer that question, not only for myself, but help others achieve that, to understand how to harness your hormones to the best of your ability so you can reach your full potential. Hence the title of my book, Hormones Human Potential, because that is literally the sequence of events. Your hormones make you healthy and interact with your health, and that interacts with you reaching your full potential. So that's my background. Just started off almost as a personal interest, and then I realized that this was really interesting and fascinating. And now I can work with those dancers. I'm a medical advisor to Scottish Ballet, and I'm just starting up a study with dancers, another one. And so, I'm really happy that I can combine all of my passions and my interests.
I am all about that. I am all about that. I would love to see that like a bit more in my mind. Like when in one of your presentations, you talked about how hormones help drive positive adaptations to training and quote unquote bring DNA to life, which I really appreciated that. What is that? What does that actually look like? Like what do you mean by that? Like when I go, like I swam 300 meters this morning, right? Like what does that, what's going on hormonally? I know you talk about it being like a feedback loop too, right? Like with your hormones and what you're doing. Can you give us a little, just a nice picture, paint a picture for of what's happening?
So the word hormone derives from ancient Greek, meaning setting in motion, right? And that's literally what it does. It sets in motion your DNA. I mean, everyone knows out of DNA, the blueprint for life, which lives in the nucleus of all of our cells, right? But have you ever thought, there it is, that beautiful double helix, but how do you kind of unlock that? So that DNA is coding for particular types of proteins, right? So you've done your, what did you say, 800-meter swim? Anyway, you've done
3,000 meters.
Oh,
I wish it was
3,000. Sorry, I said
wish it was 800.
Right, sorry.
It was a long time.
3,000 anyway. Meters. Well, anyway, I did swimming yesterday. Oh, actually, no, I went swimming this morning, but I don't think it was as long as that. Anyway, so we do our exercise, whatever that might be. And as you say, how does that translate to adapting to that training? And the answer is these hormones that set in motion our DNA. So as a result of doing your exercise, at the time, it will release sort of short range chemicals, right, called exokines, right? And these in turn set in motion in the hierarchy of events. Now they will drive particular production of particular hormones. All hormones go into the cell nucleus and tell the DNA which protein to express, yes, but there are some that kind of, especially if you're doing exercise, are more you want more than others. For example, you want a lot of muscle protein, thank you very much, don't you? And the hormone that does that very nicely for you is growth hormone. And the two main stimuli for growth hormone release are exercise and sleep. So hormones are the missing link between you do your training, you do your exercise, and we all know instinctively that should help us to be fitter, better body composition, cardiovascular health, all these things. We know that, right? But when I was a youngster, I was wondering exactly that same question. How does that translate one to the other? And then I realized it's what you do on the outside, your behaviors, they harness your hormones. They say, hey, growth hormone, please, we need more. And the growth hormone sets in motion the path to you becoming fitter. For example, it will go into the DNA, it will bring the DNA to life, particularly that particular location for making muscle protein, for example. And lo and behold, now, yes, you get stronger, different body composition, leaner, whatever it is. And now this is the feedback loop I'm talking about. Because if we don't do anything, then our hormones will just keep everything status quo, homeostasis. We need to have a nice, stable internal environment. But if you challenge that through exercise, for example, then the body instinct, it will adapt. And that's what I mean. The adaptations are driven by the hormones. And by the way, slightly diverting from, well, it's not diverting from this conversation, but parts of this conversation, of course, I'm not advocating in any way, shape or form that athletes should dope, but just anecdotally, we know that 75% of doping offenses are with hormones, because athletes know that hormones drive these positive adaptations. And one of my research projects a couple of years ago, well, several years ago now, was to develop an anti-doping test for growth hormone, because athletes knew very well that growth hormone drives positive adaptation. So they were trying to take a shortcut, which not only, number one, apart from being cheating, is actually dangerous for your health, you see, quite, which is the main reason, by the way, we have these doping rules in place, because of the, of course, for cheating, but also actually for, bearing in mind this will have adverse effects on the health of the athlete, you see, because the body knows best how to do it, how to titrate, how much hormone you need. But, if we just inject ourselves with whatever, anyway. So that is my evidence for why hormones are so crucially important and drive those positive adaptations to exercise. So absolutely, we want to say thank you to those hormones for setting in motion and bringing to life our DNA. And also, because I've just told you that, you want to now make sure you are getting the most value from your hormones. That's why I use that expression, harnessing your hormones. So do all the things that you can do. Train smart, good nutrition, good sleep. All of those things are in everyone's power, right? That's really good to know, isn't it? It's in your power, in your grasp. If you can get a good balance of those things, you can, harness your hormones to drive those positive adaptations.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for that really great illustration of that. You mentioned sleep a few times in here, and then also in one of the presentations it says like hormones, spring into action during your sleep. And I was thinking, I have written about human growth hormone before, and sort of like when it pulses during the night.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you could talk a bit about that part of it, that human growth hormone, because it is like, is it because we're repairing at night? Is that why it's?
Yes, exactly, because we're sleeping, and so we think, oh well, we're not doing anything. But that's what I mean by the hormones spring into life, because they're going to take account of everything you've done during the day, and they're going to drive those changes, adaptations. The hormones, it takes a bit of time for the hormone to go into the nucleus, to tell the protein to be produced, for it to get to the right place. So it takes time. But actually, you can, the best time to do this is when the person is asleep. So you can really focus on that job. So that's why the two main stimuli for growth hormone release are exercise and sleep. So you can't just do the exercise, by the way. You have to have your recovery and your sleep. So growth hormone is an example when it pulses at night, but plenty of the other hormones, particularly the female reproductive hormones, for example. LH pulses at night. It's when you, and that's when puberty starts, by the way, you know, and your periods start, because we know from studies and research that that's when you see the LH pulses first wake up, when you're asleep.
Luteinizing hormone.
Yeah, exactly. LH, yeah, luteinizing hormone, exactly. So lots of the hormones are busying themselves when you're asleep because they've kind of got the opportunity, if you see what I mean. And that's the other thing to point out about hormones. They're not just like, it's not an on-off switch. They've got more subtlety in the message. A nerve impulse is on-off, literally. The on-off response is either electrical current or not. That's it, right? But the hormones have a whole way of expressing themselves, if I can put it that way. There's, of course, the level of it. How high is it? How low is it? But also the frequency. Is it like the pulsatility of it? It's like a Morse code thing. It's a message, you see. And so there's lots of fine tuning involved in that hormone release, and lots of that has the opportunity to happen while you're asleep, which is why it's super sleep is the chief nourisher in life's great feast. That's not my quote, it's Shakespeare, but anyway, it's a good one.
I like that.
The point, right? That is when, I mean, we all know instinctively sleep. We all know what it feels like if you hadn't had a good night's sleep. I can tell you one thing, being a junior doctor is really bad for your health, mainly because it disrupts sleep. And if we have disrupted sleep, circadian misalignment, as we call it, that's going to really mess up your hormones, because your hormones also have their own clocks. Not only do they have the certain message, but they also have their own clocks. So we have the diurnal variation of cortisol, for example. Growth hormone, we've already described how it's sort of a nocturnal fluctuation, as it were. And of course, the female hormones as well. That's the even longer sort of clock, as it were, over, you know, a lunar month, roughly. Anyway, so they all have different clocks, and they're all internally synchronized and know quite well what we're doing, but frankly we can sort of mess it up a bit. Although we can harness the hormones, we can also definitely disrupt them, and one way to disrupt your hormones is, you know, poor sleep or disrupted sleep or strange sleep patterns, which is why I truthfully say it's not healthy to be a doctor.
No doubt.
Because
That's
it
a whole other
disrupts your sleep.
podcast. Like, what are you doing to medical professionals, especially during residency? But that is a
yeah,
whole.
well, quite. That's what I'm talking about. That's the similar. Well, that's what we call in England the junior doctor years, when
Crazy.
it's like, yeah, exactly, residency, crazy. Anyway, that's why sleep. I mention sleep a lot because it's well, we know it's important for health, and we know how we feel, you know, how important, but also for the hormone health, particularly, it's a really important piece.
So I have a few questions linking all this together. It is funny when you said Morse code, because in something that I wrote at some point, I described sort of perimenopause as your hormones giving you SOS signals.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. It's a scrambled Morse code. Exactly. Very good point. Yeah.
Pretty much where we're at. But so do the reproductive hormones, you know, specifically like estradiol and progesterone, are they interacting with growth hormone at all? Is there a interplay there?
Yes, I mean, all of them, although we can think of these hormones as different sort of families, different members of the orchestra. So actually how I describe the hormones is the pituitary gland, which is located in the brain, that is the conductor of the endocrine orchestra, and it is an orchestra. So I don't know, we could call the string section, we could call that the reproductive axis, for example. We could call the brass section, what we're going to call that, the thyroid axis. You know what I mean? They've all got their separate parts, but the whole thing comes together as a symphony, doesn't it? You see? And so there are, that's why I describe them as hormone networks. So there are particular families like this, but they definitely have, you know, they're talking to each other as well. So, for example, and also because they're all controlled by the same place in the brain. Good place to have your control system, by the way, located right in the brain, one level even above the pituitary gland. The top boss is called the hypothalamus. What a great place to put the hypothalamus. Right there where your optic nerves cross over, right up there. So it's going to keep a watching brief on what's happening inside your body, your internal networks, interactions, homeostasis, but also it's going to see what's going on outside. Not only in terms of outside, in terms of in terms of environment. I mean, it's actually quite warm here today for once in London, but also, you know, it's going to keep an eye on external stuff like other stressors, exercise, things like this. So this is literally right in the center, keeping a watching brief on everything. And it's therefore going to direct the separate members of the orchestra, and they all come together. You're right, there is some interaction. For example, I would say a good example of a hormone, cortisol, is a bit of a tricksy one. Cortisol, everyone probably knows that hormone, which is released in response to stressors. So stress of any sort. So exercise, lack of sleep, lack of food, you know, anything. But the hypothalamus is brilliant, but it's not that clever. It doesn't distinguish what the stress is, by the way, but it just knows there's a bit of stress around. So quite sensibly, it instructs more release of cortisol. And cortisol prioritizes, it's kind of fight and flight sort of thing. It backs up adrenaline effectively. And so you don't want to be worrying about other stuff like, you know, the reproductive axis and whatever. So the cortisol does two jobs. It, you know, keeps you on high alert, but also it can down-regulate the other ones, the other members of the orchestra, because actually they're less of a priority right now, you see.
Yep.
So that's an example of an interaction between hormone families, should I say.
So what is happening in the hypothalamus during the menopause transition when we start entering perimenopause that is causing this desynchronization maybe of our orchestra?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing to be absolutely clear about and emphasize is that the menopause is not an illness and it's not disease.
100%. That is not my language here.
No, we'll just make that clear. Just to, you know, really that it's, you know, it's the female hormone odyssey, as I call it, the journey that you go through. You go through your period starting, you go through your reproductive years, the menstrual cycles, maybe take a little diversion to pregnancy or whatever, or maybe your periods stop when they shouldn't. We don't, anyway, there's that bit. And then we come to the graduation to menopause. The ovaries have hopefully been working, you know, pretty hard. So we give them retirement, right? So it's when the ovaries retire, but it's not a smooth retirement. Again, it's not the on-off switch. It's not like, okay, regular cycles and then, you know, that's it, retired. It's this in-between bit, the perimenopause, which is really tricky. And as you say, this desynchronization of the hormones. I mean, why does that happen? It's probably because the eggs, which are all prepared when we're in our mother's uterus, all the eggs are prepared then. They literally reach their sell-by date. So we're not sure exactly where the clock is, probably, I think, in the ovaries themselves, in the eggs themselves. Say, look, actually, you know, this is the time, thanks. We've reached our sell-by date. We want to retire, you know. And so that will, in terms of the hypothalamus is like, that's annoying. The ovaries aren't doing what we're telling them to do. They're not, you know, producing that beautiful fluctuation, the choreography of the hormones of the menstrual cycle. What's up there? And so actually that's why the pituitary gland is instructed to start increasing the level of FSH and LH. And we know when you reach, if you do the blood test on a woman who has reached menopause, you will see her FSH and LH are very high, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, like we said, but they're very high. And the estrogen and progesterone are actually very low. So actually, what you're saying, what has the hypothalamus got to do with that? Well, actually, it's kind of a bit annoyed. Or, you know, in that sense, that's why it tells the conductor, the pituitary gland, to increase in the hopes it can revive the ovaries, but ultimately when push comes to shove, it sort of gets stuck there and it's like, okay. But that's why you know, there's this dramatic change in the profile of our hormones, and also it's that transition bit, which in my opinion is actually the more tricky bit, because when your periods are stopped and that's it, and that's fixed, then at least you know what you're dealing with. But it's that in between bit, the perimenopause. It's like I say, Vivaldi in the Four Seasons with the hormones. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. It's like, oh, you know, it can be frustrating.
Yeah, and just to circle the other part, I don't know what instrument they're playing here in the orchestra, that bringing human growth hormone back into this. What I'm interested in is, because we know, like in everybody, it declines over time, right? With age, human growth hormone does. Um, is menopause impacting that at all? And I imagine if I am disrupting in my sleep, that is because of what's going on, that might have a knockoff effect on.
Yeah, an additional fact. A very good point. I mean, growth hormone declines full stop with age.
Yeah.
And we know this because in men as well.
Yeah.
So men and women, we know. And by the way, just to re-emphasize, growth hormone isn't, I think we've made that clear, not just about children growing, obviously, right? But it's for maintaining good body composition. And we know, there's a medical condition, well, normally induced by a neurosurgeon, actually, who goes poking around in the pituitary gland. If there's a problem there and they have to remove some of it, sometimes they remove, well, it's difficult, to be fair, operating on the pea-sized pituitary gland. Anyway, if you take away quite a lot of that, then the growth hormone obviously is going to go very low. And we know in those people who have growth hormone deficiency, also there's a medical condition where you don't produce enough, we know that they don't have much muscle, you see, so we know it affects body composition. But anyway, come back to your question. So we know age in general, men and women, everything is sort of twilight years, just winding down a little bit. And so growth hormone definitely will decrease. But you're absolutely right, and you make a very important point there, that we know that menopause and all these Vivaldi in the 4 seasons with the female hormones, it disrupts sleep, temperature regulation goes up the spout, all this sort of thing. So, and you're quite right, we've said that sleep is super important for growth hormone. So that it is compounded secondary to the consequences of menopause. So yeah, it's a kind of a double whammy, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in a lot of the I've read some of your writings and again listened to you, and I really appreciate that you talk about strength training and exercise and all of that as a way. And we started this conversation as in that sort of feedback loop mechanism, right? I've always understood that strength training and like more high intensity training can help with some of this human growth hormone and help with some of this hormonal journey. Can you speak a little bit about how we can help, as we're in that place? Yeah.
So men and women again, so masters athletes, in other words, or masters exercises, you don't have to be competing or whatever, but because of that decline in growth hormone may be compounded by menopause, and also the female hormones are also important, estrogen especially, for, by the way, muscle quality, soft tissue quality, all that sort of thing. So you're also potentially more prone to injury. But it's not all doom and gloom. You can do your best. The system will still respond like it's programmed to. It will still adapt and respond to exercise, but you might as well really target the exercise that is particularly helpful for body composition and, muscle production, as it were. In other words, those types of exercise like you've just outlined. It's particularly the strength training. The thing about the strength training, why it's particularly recommended, is because of the growth hormone effect. Even though it's a lower level, it will still respond to a certain extent. It will try its best, and that will help. But also the metabolic effect of doing strength training, because it as we get older in general, and especially as we reach the menopause, we know that the decline in the female hormones, along with the growth hormone, will affect, our metabolism, and we're more likely to become insulin resistant, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that doing strength training not only does it have a really good effect on your metabolism at the time of doing the exercise, because you're engaging lots of muscles, big muscle groups all at once, but also afterwards, even after you've stopped, then, because of the repair process building up the muscles, you'll still actually, it increases the metabolic rate to a certain extent. So that's why it's the extra effect, not only on the body composition, but actually on metabolic health. And there've been some good studies recently out, specifically in menopausal women, showing the benefits of strength training on cardiometabolic health, also, of course, bone density.
Right.
The best way of, and again, estradiol is queen when it comes to bone mineral density, bone health. And so we all know that as you reach the menopause, then, the bones can, be lacking, well, obviously, and sad that the estrogen's low. So to maintain bone health as well, this is why strength training has that extra benefit, you see. And although running, everyone thinks, oh, running is good for bone health. Well, of course, I'm not going to say it's bad for your health, bone health, but it tends to be all be in one plane. Whereas the strength training will load all parts of the skeleton and in different ways, right? So that's why, so strength training is definitely top of the list. HIIT training, you have to be a little bit careful because that will invoke a big release in cortisol, you see. And we've also said cortisol, you have to be a little, you want some cortisol in the system, obviously, to give you the oomph for the get up and go. But again, when it flicks over into too much. So I'm not saying no HIIT training, but just, if you're starting from a clean sheet, what you're going to put, what you're going to do as top, number one is strength training. Number two, well, by the way, number two is probably something you really enjoy. Right. So for me, that's my dancing or whatever. So
yeah, right. Whatever your
so
sport
that,
of
by the way, that also is something you enjoy if and then, yeah, sure, of course, cardiovascular and maybe some HIIT, but that's sort of in moderation and interspersed with the strength training. And as we get a little bit older and certainly going through menopause, then you will need more recovery. Simple as that. That's the way it goes. So it's really the quality of any exercise you do, not the quantity. And let's be realistic. You can't train like you were when you were 21. Okay. So you have to change as your hormones change, you change what you do. You're giving, so that sort of makes logical sense. And you're not being weak and feeble if you need an extra rest day or you want an easy day. That's fine. If your body needs that, you need it.
100%. And this audience, as you know, I mean, you've written for Training Peaks. It's a very sort of similar audience. We have a lot of strength athletes too, who are maybe in the CrossFit sort of, team over there. But supporting that as well with nutrition, right? Before we leave this is really important. You mentioned just very specifically in the nutrition piece, like protein for sure. And vitamin D is a steroid hormone, correct?
Absolutely. I'm absolutely. And that's a real easy win. So the protein, yes. Hopefully everyone's ticking off their protein requirements. And, because it's a complex molecule, you can't eat it all, obviously, in one sitting. So you spread it out. And also having pre-sleep protein. Been good studies in masters athletes showing, because when you're asleep, actually, that's definitely when you need the protein on hand, because as building blocks to make the muscles because of the growth hormone, right? So especially casein is a particular type of protein to take at bed, which is sort of fast-tracked, as it were, to the muscles, right? So might as well make it easy. And very good studies to show that actually, if you take some protein on board before we go to sleep, that helps. And so protein requirements, definitely. Also the timing of the protein, super important to prevent mitigate against the potential loss of muscle, or the extreme example of that is sarcopenia, very weak muscles. So protein for sure, but also vitamin D is an easy win. And you're right, I'm claiming it for a steroid hormone. Well, it is, because it is. If you look at the structure of it, it's like a steroid one, like this necklace here I'm wearing. I don't know if you can see that. That's actually estradiol. That's a steroid hormone.
I love it.
You see, it's got little steroid rings. Anyway, so, but vitamin D is unusual, because normally you think vitamins, you think, oh, well, that comes through the diet. But you can only get a certain amount through the diet, even if you eat dairy produce and oily fish, throughout the day. You still will struggle to reach your requirements, because the main source of vitamin D, unusually, is actually the sun, the action of sunlight on our skin. And, unless you live in the Sahara, then probably, you're not going to be able to get enough sunlight on the skin. And certainly here in the UK, Public Health England recommend we all take vitamin D at the very least during the winter months. Personally, I actually take it all year round, unless I'm going on a holiday to a sunny place. We went windsurfing in Italy a couple of weeks ago, so I didn't pack my vitamin D then. I have to, but generally I think keeping that level at a good level. And vitamin D is so important, steroid hormone, important for bone health, right? Important for muscle recovery, interesting. Good studies showing better recovery from eccentric muscle loading if you have vitamin D, interesting, and fewer injuries, study in dancers, fewer injuries, and also very important for immune health, topical. And general overall well-being. We know people with low vitamin D levels, not only are you going to be more at risk of stress fractures, etc., you're probably going to be feeling a bit down, like low mood and low, just like not great. So vitamin D, definitely an easy win.
Excellent. Let's talk menopause hormone therapy. Which I know you've written about, and you work with many active athletic people. Do women come to you specifically for help staying on top of their training, while they're navigating perimenopause and menopause? And then is that track usually hormone therapy for you?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, I see athletes and exercises dance for various reasons, RED or relative energy deficiency in sport is certainly a big thing I see, but also the masters athletes in that age group, men and women, by the way, but women, of course, especially because the hormones get really complicated then. And actually, the most challenging thing, which I love, by the way, did I mention the other reason I love hormones? Because they're really complicated. I love it. I love the detective work. You have to really unravel it. So, for example, a woman who is 44, she presents saying, my cycles are becoming irregular, shorter, and I'm just not feeling great. Maybe I got a niggly injury, that sort of thing. And so the question is that teetering on relative energy deficiency in sport or low energy availability, or is that perimenopause? Tricky, but interesting. So obviously there will be some major clues. We go through her training load, her nutrition, and obviously if she says she's doing the dreaded fasted training, oh no, right? Female hormones love complex carbohydrates. Anyway, if it's that, and
we've done whole shows on that.
Yeah, no. So if she explains that, then it's like, oh, this is leading more to the REDS thing. But on the other hand, if actually she hasn't changed from that and actually her age and her other symptoms, maybe she's getting a little bit of the temperature regulation, hot flushes and other things, and it's going to tip you more in that way. But ultimately, doing a blood test will be really helpful so we can pick out. So you're saying to me, why would a masters athlete come and see me? So the first thing is, do I need to unpick that? Do I need to really clarify? And sometimes I have found it that actually it is low energy availability. And on the blood test, the T3, particularly the thyroid hormone, is low, for example. So I might get some clues from that. Okay. Right. But let's say we've excluded that. And actually all the picture is saying perimenopause. So it's like, okay, what do we do now? So of course, the first thing is we go through the training load and nutrition to make sure we've ticked off what we've just discussed. Strength training. I think lots of athletes, especially masters athletes, maybe they weren't in the generation, certainly I'm not, of strength training. Like
they used to discourage it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, because for example, my younger sons, I've only got sons. Anyway, both of them, my sons, they were brought up with, right, you must do your strength training a lot. So first of all, simple things. Let's just check out the training load, strength training, tick, whatever, right? More recovery, tick. Protein, tick. Vitamin D, tick. All these things are as much as everything is optimized there, from lifestyle, athlete behaviors, whatever you want to call it. Then we have the HRT discussion. You've done all of that, you've done everything you can, but you're still not feeling great. Then for sure, we will discuss HRT and immediately dispel myths and other things. So yes, there is an slight increased risk in breast cancer, to the tune of an extra 4 cases per 1,000 women aged 50 to 59. By the way, this is exactly the same risk as if you take the oral contraceptive pill. Yet no one tells us about that. So it's no more riskier than taking the oral contraceptive pill, by the way.
Or if you drink wine.
And exactly. Yeah. So there you go. And compared to a whopping increase, extra 24 cases, if you aren't doing exercise of any sort and you were overweight, smoking, drinking, blah, 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 right? And also the other thing is if you're doing 2.5 hours of regular exercise or more per week, that decreases the number of cases by 7. So if you do your math, you're still better off. So certainly when you say, would I encourage it? I would have this conversation to put into perspective the risk benefits. And ultimately, if there are the only absolute contraindication for not taking HRT is if you have a personal history of breast cancer. And I have a friend, my dear friend in my ballet class, who unfortunately did go through that, and she can't take HRT, and she's really like, oh no. Anyway, so, but otherwise, if we've clarified all of that, my opinion is you've got nothing to lose. We try. Let's try the lowest dose. That's always important. We've had a little bit of a debacle here in England.
Oh boy.
Somebody who was being doling out very high doses of HRT. Anyway, it's common sense and it's basic medical practice. You start off with the lowest dose, you titrate. So we would start off very low dose. Let's see how you go. If you're still having some sort of cycles, we'll try and sync it with your cycle. And actually, the other thing that's changed is that the sooner you start it in one way, the better. It used to be that you'd wait until you reach menopause, which by definition is 12 months of no period. So it's like you have to suffer and go through hell for 12 months to qualify for having HRT. But anyway, thankfully that's now changed. Actually starting it, I think, when you're noticing symptoms and cycles, it's actually better because then you can smooth into that and won't have so much of a jolt and change in the hormones. So, you know, starting it then and starting a very low dose and seeing how we go. And then I say to the woman, give it a chance. I get some emails, oh, you know, a few days later, it hasn't made any difference. Listen, it won't. You have to give it at least 3 months for it to make a fair assessment. Has this helped, or have you still got symptoms? And then, of course, we would talk about just tweaking the dose and increasing it gradually, and seeing if we can get it right. Personalizing it is all about personalization of the HRT. And the other myth, just to dispel while we're on this whole topic so we can clear up everything, is that there used to be the thing like, oh, how long do you take it for? It used to be said that it was 5 years and then that's it, you stop. But again, that's kind of ridiculous if you think about it. So you just delay feeling really bad for 5 years. So, you know, I mean, I got this feeling, which I jokingly I say this, but I actually am committed to it. I've got this feeling they're going to have to prize HRT out of my hand, because if you're feeling good on it and, you know, you feel you got the dose right and there's no problems, then actually, you know, why would you stop? But it's an individual choice. Again, I'm not forcing anyone to, number one, take it, or you have to stay on it forever. It's entirely up to the individual choice, but to know that it is a choice and it should be an informed choice. So I trying, you know, give all the information, all the questions, so the person is absolutely understanding why and everything like this, and then leave it to them to decide.
Is that dialing in process any different for active women? You know, I had on a doctor in the States who loves dialing in hormone therapy too. She sort of geeks out similarly, but you know, she was clear, like, especially when you're dealing with a woman who has an intact uterus and you have to add the progesterone and there's a bit more of a dance to it. Is that dialing in any different when you're talking about someone who's doing Ironman training or CrossFit, or not that matter?
Well, in general terms, I'm going to say no, but on the other hand, of course, that person that is got, you know, very in tune with their body already, and it makes it easier because they know what they want to feel like, you know what I mean? And they will notice a slight difference in something. Again, it's not the elixir of youth. You won't take, just to be clear, you won't take HRT and then suddenly now you win Kona, right? You know what I mean?
Well,
yeah, but
I guess the show is done. I'm sorry. Yeah,
no, well,
that's where we were going.
But it will. But in that sense, it's important. You know, actually the woman will be more in tune with her body and knows how she would like to feel like, or close to where she wants to be. So in that sense, it's better. But in terms of the, you know, the best type of HRT, it's obviously the same for everybody, and also in terms of the dose, also, you know, it is the same principle. We start low, we gradually titrate upwards, and see where we go. The only thing for a woman that's competing is that, rightly or wrongly, HRT is fine, but testosterone remains on the banned list for any reason. Even, and I've had this whole thing with the masters athlete, very good, high level, and we've had this whole, discussion. It's like, look, if we monitor the levels and we prove that we're just bringing testosterone up within the range for a woman, just restoring it, replacing it to the level, but still, as I say, the answer is no. So just to warn people, women, if you are competing, I'm afraid that's a no-no. Okay.
And you can't get a TUE for that, right? You can't get
precisely. No, exactly. Which is, yeah, but there we go. Yeah, that's anyway, I've had dealings with the IOC before with the growth hormone anti-doping thing, and it's like, I'm leaving that to other people because it's too much to take on. But that's where we are at the minute, as I say.
Yeah.
Whether that's right or wrong, that's the way it is at the moment. And no, you can't get a TUE. You're right. We've tried that.
Are the forms any different? I mean, I know we have if you go into our forums at any time, you'll hear women saying like, where do you put this patch? How do you keep this patch on? Like, are there, for when you're talking about an active woman, are there certain formulations? I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can take it, right? That you find are best?
The one that's recommended as the best for the estrogen component, by the way, just to go back on your point, if you've got a uterus, i.e. you haven't had a hysterectomy, you must absolutely take estrogen and progesterone together. You mustn't take estrogen by itself, because then that makes the uterus lining too thick and a bit dangerous. So you must take both. In terms of the estrogen component, the best form is through the skin. So that's either a patch or a gel. The rationale being, if you take a tablet, it has to go through the digestive system, through the liver, etc. So through the skin, patch or gel. Again, personal preference. I've literally personally, and also athletes I work with, tend to prefer the gel, because number one, it's unobtrusive. I go swimming a lot also. And I mean, I've already got 2 scars on my legs from my hip replacements. It's like, do you know what? I don't want a patch as well. It's just like, I really look like it. Anyway, so, that's one thing. But also the other thing is it's discreet, but also there's more flexibility and more possibility to titrate the dose. The patch, in general terms, most of the patches, you just change twice a week and you just slap it on and that's it. You're done and dusted. Whereas the gel, you put it on each day. So there is even the potential to, slightly vary the dose, even, just, you don't have to have a set level. That's it, right? And if we want to go into even finer detail of the gel, you can either get it in a dispenser pump, or you can get it in like teeny little mini energy gels. And that's the one I prefer, because if I am going abroad, I don't want to be carting through this stupid estrogen pump through the liquid section. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, again, too much. I already get bleeped with my hip replacements. It's like, you know what? Just leave me alone. Just let me get through. So you just put the gel things in the suitcase and you're done and dusted. But also, again, seriously, the gels you can get 0.5 of a milligram, really small, 1 milligram, 2 milligrams, whereas the pump is just a dispense dose. Depends on the brand, but generally speaking, 1.25 or something, or 1, that's it. That's your dose. And don't try and do half a pump. It just gets, so that's my preference. And that's when I explain that to athletes, most of them say, actually, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So that's the estrogen bit. For the progesterone bit, again, various options. You can have the combined patch. You can have the Mirena coil that's licensed for use for endometrial protection, blah, 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 lots of things. But the top one recommended is what's called micronized progesterone, because it's the same molecule, identical molecular structure to the progesterone you produce yourself. So again, instinctively, again, personal, I was attracted to that. It's like, yeah, I want to give my body what it's used to seeing. So that seemed to make logical sense to me. And that isn't well absorbed through the skin. So that is a soft capsule that you take. Again, there's options. You can either take it in blocks to sort of replicate your menstrual cycle, which is what I started taking. So in the luteal phases, the progesterone tends to go high. So you would take 12-day blocks of the progesterone like that. Or that's what I opted to do at first. But my friend, interestingly, we went on to HRT at the same time. She was like, no, I've had enough with all this bleeding lark. Don't want that. She just takes progesterone continuously every day. In the evening, the advantage of micronized progesterone, it's got a mild sedative effect. So if you take it in the evening, it helps with sleep. It's like, yay, great. And actually, new research suggests that it's actually, although there's a very low risk of breast cancer, that risk, it's thought, is actually in the progesterone part you take of the HRT. And again, this micronized progesterone I'm talking about has got the best profile in that sense, you see. And the brand name here in the UK, it's Utrogestan. I think, what's the other one? There's another brand of it, which the name escapes me in other countries, but certainly that's something that, again, ultimately it's your choice. You know, it might be that if you've already got the Mirena coil in place, for example, or you just think, well, actually, just for convenience, I want that, that's entirely your choice. But it's so you make the right choice for you, and you know all the facts and the figures, and you figure out what's going to suit you best.
What's the form on the coil? What's the form on the Mirena of the progesterone?
That's norethisterone.
Okay.
So it's a slightly androgenic progesterone, which you could argue, if you're not allowed to take testosterone, maybe that's the advantage of it there. Right. But I just didn't, again, but then if you're, you know, I know my molecules, and it's like, I don't want to have that one. So it depends. It really depends what but so long as you're making that choice. I made that, that's what I weighed up. I mean, number one, I've never had a coil in, so kind of that also was like a thing for me anyway. It's like, actually, you know, and also norethisterone versus micronized progesterone. It's like, no, I prefer that one, you see. And also, again, that feeling of control, because you put the Mirena coil in and that's it. You leave it there for 3 or 5 years or whatever it is, depending, you know. But whereas, again, I prefer, and again, this is personal, I prefer being in control, and I've got it in my hands, and I, you know what I'm doing, sort of thing. But it really depends. On the other hand, some people like that they don't have to think about that every day. I mean, I don't think about it every day. I just do it.
Yeah,
so,
I get it.
So you know what I mean? It's, again, this is personal choice and personal preference.
I have loved every bit of this conversation, I have to say. You know, I expressed to you, you know, in some of my questions before we started, like, I have to be honest, like sometimes I have these conversations and I love them and I'm interested in them, but there's this drumbeat in the background right now that all women should be on HRT. And, you know, there's a lot of sort of, you know, I spend a lot of time in this world and I sort of hear these messages, and like, I personally am not on it, and I feel great. So like, I feel great. I'm sleeping great. Everything is great. So there's part of me like, would I feel even super, super duper great if I was, you know, like, am I missing something? And it just sort of gets in my head a little bit, but I also don't like to rock boats that are steady. So, you know, it's been a really,
listen, I think that's a really important point. We should stress, because lots of people say, oh, that Dr. Nicky, she's very pro HRT. Well, I just give the facts. You know, this is, you know, and most of the people that come and see me, it's because they are struggling, you see. But I agree with you. There is also this thing that you almost feel like, oh, well, everyone should I get on this bandwagon and all this sort of thing. So, you know, no, it's entirely your choice. And you've just described that you feel perfectly fine. Thank you very much. You know all the information there. And, you know, it's ultimately your choice. And if you feel fine and you're doing everything, and plus, if you are doing all those lifestyle things, those are actually the priority ones. So you don't, some people just think they can take a shortcut and just keep doing, you know, not such great, let's be honest, lifestyle, and just take the HRT as a shortcut almost. Again, that's not ideal either. So it's entirely your choice, but definitely it's one that you want to make that choice being really super informed and knowing what the options are, what the pros and the cons are. And, you know, there are some women, you know, like I said, who can't take HRT because of breast cancer, like my friend I mentioned, or who, it's very rare, but sometimes. I had a lovely lady the other day, cyclist, who was really struggling. And actually it just didn't, she seems to have a reaction to soy products, which is what's some of these HRTs are derived from, you see, the body identical ones. So, you know what I mean? It's not for everybody, but it's certainly an option there. But it's finding that fine balance. You see, there was a time when a paper came out and was scaring all women, and that was based on incorrect information.
For
so
20
suddenly
years.
the pendulum exactly swung the other way. You know, people have stopped taking it, and now it's almost gone the other way. But so you have to sort of just make the decision right for you. But I always say, you know, knowledge is power. Get the information, listen to what we've been talking about, read my book, and you know, and know all the facts so you can make the decision that's right for you.
Yeah, I'm 100% about that. And just taking because the hormones are the orchestra, but it's part of a larger orchestra, correct?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
exactly. The interaction with what you're doing
right.
on the outside, which is definitely always the priority, by the way, you know, always the priority. And the hormones are, in terms of HRT, certainly are the extra bits that you could are available if you wish to you know, keep that orchestra going really well, or whatever, or maybe it's fine as it is. And there are some people, women like that. So it's really up to you, but it's just making sure what I don't want to happen is that women, you know, say, oh, I didn't realize, right? And they're now later on and thinking, oh, I struggled with all this, I was feeling awful and everything. If only I'd known the facts, I would have made a different decision. So that's really the thing we want to avoid, obviously.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that. I'm like, there's no trophy for suffering through anything.
No,
Like,
quite.
there's no, and when you dig into the literature and see these connections that they're making between severe symptoms and cardiovascular disease and other things, I mean, there seems to be, you know, there are links being connected there that they're still teasing it out and research is ongoing, but I would very much encourage somebody with severe symptoms to investigate it because of those links. I mean, you
Yeah.
might be more predisposed to
Oh,
some
yes,
of those
definitely. Well, we
diseases.
know that the you know, osteoporosis is the silent
Well,
killer.
for sure that, yeah. I mean,
So, and
osteoporosis
actually
for
now
sure.
it's changed that HRT actually is, thank goodness, the primary
Yeah,
treatment for
yeah,
poor bone health. It used to
yeah.
be this disgusting, really horrible bisphosphonates, which made you sick and blah, blah. Anyway, whatever. So, yes, it's the most important thing for considering HRT is your quality of life. If you are getting severe symptoms, but also you have half an eye on the future as well. And for example, in my situation, I've got, unfortunately, not a great family history of osteoporosis. And also in the past, I did have pretty bad REDs. And anyway, so I know my bones are not in a good situation.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, that was also slightly on my mind about the bone health in the future. And also we know that women, as you go past menopause and beyond, estrogen is an amazing hormone, not only for bone health, but actually cardiovascular health. So we know that there is an increased risk in cardiovascular disease as the further we get away from the menopause. And initially, I just went to a conference recently, and you know, so it makes logical sense that HRT would help with cardiovascular disease, although the jury's slightly out on that. But again, it's weighing up all these things. So it's
And it's
definitely
something
number
you
one on
can
symptom.
measure. I mean, a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
these are measurable. You can
Well, that's
measure
a
your
very good point. You
cardiovascular
can get
health.
a DEXA, you can get a DEXA scan, very
Yeah.
low radiation dose, and you can see where you are, and you'll know already, you know, family history of cardiovascular disease, and you know, you could potentially do a blood test if you want and see what your cholesterol profile is looking like and your inflammatory markers. So that's a very good point. You can always sort of quantify this for yourself, so you know. I mean, I know, yeah, my DEXA isn't pretty. Well, it's even not pretty at all now because they can only do the lumbar spine. They can't do this because it's got metal in. Anyway,
Oh.
anyway, you know what I mean. So that's actually quite an easy
Yeah.
thing to do. And also, just to flip back a little bit, I know it's slightly out of sync, but you know, for the younger women, we know now, hopefully we've put that one to bed as well, that if you have got REDs and you're amenorrheic and you've got poor bone health, it's not the pill, not bone protective, it is HRT temporarily. And so, you know, HRT, of course, we're talking mainly about perimenopause, menopause, but also just to mention that it can be used, should be used if a woman with REDs, you're concerned about her bone health. Of course, the priority is trying to get our own periods restarted, rebooted, but if that's going to prove tricky. There's psychological barriers and behavior changes to overcome. And, the bone health is not looking good either from DEXA and or stress fractures, then actually as a temporizing measure, HRT can be helpful in that situation as well.
Yeah, excellent points. We've done entire shows on low energy availability and RES and relative energy, and it can be devastating. So I mean, it is very, very important to bring that point up. So thank you for that. Thank you. I mean, for everything. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you thought that this audience could benefit from about any of this, whether it's our chorus of hormones or what we should be thinking about going through this time of life as active women?
I think the main thing is that, people you can get annoyed with your hormones, and this word I really dislike, hormone imbalance. I understand what people are trying to say, but actually we shouldn't blame our hormones, by the way. Our hormones are, millions of years of evolution, they do a pretty good job, right? If you treat them nicely. So that's also a positive message to end on. I think that you can harness your hormones through those behaviors that we discussed of the exercise, the nutrition, and the sleep. So hopefully that's given people a really positive message that you can absolutely open to everybody, really get those nailed for you individually, whatever your age is, appropriate for you, and that will really help you on your hormone journey. And be aware there are other things that can help, like HRT and whatever along the way, but you can definitely do a lot yourself to take control of the situation by harnessing our own hormones through those means.
Well, that's our show. Come on back next week when I sit down with Sandra Buchert, owner, founder, and trainer at One-on-One Fitness. Sandra started bodybuilding when she was just 16. Now, 40 years later, she's still in the strength and fitness game, but she's made a few changes. We talk all about that next week, so come on back for that one. And until then, as always, stay feisty. You've been listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I'm your host, Celine Yeager. The show is edited and produced by the strong, talented, and amazing women at Live Feisty Media. Follow us on social media at Feisty Menopause, and please help us spread the word. Screenshot and share this episode on your social media channels with the tag @FeistyMenopause. Share the show with your friends, and please subscribe, like, review, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth and good reviews make it easier for other listeners to find. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay feisty.